Hello everyone. Thank you very much for joining us in this session, this 10th session of the Geneva Trade Week. How can blockchain help alleviate the impact of COVID-19 on supply chains, from threats to opportunity? So before we start this session, I would really like to thank the Geneva Macro Labs who have managed to organize this, and in particular Renate Günther, the Vice President and co-founder who has organized this event and his work behind the scene to make this session happen. Thank you very much, Renate. And thanks to our speakers, we have today 4 great speakers, big experts on the topic who are going to make short presentations to tell you, how the COVID has affected supply chains and how we can use new solutions to, correct these weaknesses that we have identified and maybe turn this COVID crisis into an opportunity to improve international trade. So in terms of the timing for this session, so we're going to have 45 minutes of the presentations, so from 11 until 11:45, and then we're going to move on to a Q&A from 11:45 to 12:30. Feel free to, write down your questions in the Q&A section if you have questions for our speakers, and we will get to them at 11:45. So before we start this session, I would like to ask you guys a question. I would like to publish a poll. Antonio, if you can please share the poll with our audience. So my question is to you guys, how familiar are you with DLT? So you have several solutions. Are you an expert of DLT? Are you passionate? Are you curious to learn more? Or do you wonder if DLT stands for delete? So feel free, you have a bit of time to answer the poll. I'll leave you a few seconds, and then we move on to the presentations. All right. Antonio, can we close the poll and see the results? All right. So what do we have there? I don't see that well. Let me adjust the columns here. Okay, so we have almost 30% of people who are curious to learn more. We have 20% of people who are passionate, so that's pretty cool. We have 9% of experts, I guess it's the speakers. And then we have 0% who didn't know what DLT means. But we had 40% without answer, so probably, probably there's a bit of a margin here. All right, well, thank you very much, guys, for taking part in this poll. We are now going to move on to the presentations, and we are going to start with Emmanuel Gann's presentation. So Emmanuel is an international trade expert and blockchain enthusiast, as well as a senior analyst at the Economic Research Department of the World Trade Organization. So during her presentation, Emmanuel will look at the impact of COVID-19 on supply chains and how blockchain technology can help mitigate supply chain disruptions caused by the current pandemic. She will present some initiatives that leverage the technology to address trade-related COVID-19 challenges. Emmanuel will discuss challenges to be addressed to support the development of the technology, as well as policy implications and the role that governments and international organizations can play. Emmanuel, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Emily. Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. And a big thank you to Geneva Macro Labs for having organized this session. And just want to check whether I have control of the slides. I'm not sure. Antonio, would you mind actually, could I say just next for the next slide, because I don't seem to have control.
You have the rights now, but if you want, I can also change it for you. Yeah, I can do it for you as well.
I think
Emma.
that would be easier if someone can do it,
I
because
can
I don't seem to be able to do it.
I can do it for
So
you.
I had
No
some
worries.
connection problems this morning. So yes, so if you could, yeah, if you could go to the next one, that's fine. Perfect. Thanks a lot. Well, needless to say, we're going through unprecedented times. A virus hit the world earlier this year, and this virus hit supply chains very, very severely, causing major supply chain disruptions. The current crisis has revealed structural inadequacies in our supply chains. First, the COVID-19 pandemic has exposed supply chain inefficiencies when it comes to the sourcing of critical supplies like ventilators and the famous PPEs, personal protective equipment. So we saw empty shelves, not only toilet paper, also masks and gloves, as you can see on this slide. And a growing number of manufacturing companies have decided to temporarily pivot to make and supply masks and other needed medical supplies. But this caused another problem, because these companies were not known as medical supplies, device suppliers. And so there was no easy way for hospitals, governmental agencies, or healthcare organizations to quickly find these alternative suppliers. So making supply chains more agile is essential to help alleviate the impact of disruptions such as the current pandemic. And it's even more important now when you think that we're likely to experience such pandemics or such disruptions on a more regular basis, according to a number of studies that have been published recently. Now, second, the current pandemic revealed that tracking is vital. There were several counterfeit scandals over the past recent months that have highlighted the vulnerability of the medical device supply chain. For example, in March, US authorities seized more than 80 million counterfeit and 40 masks. So this underscores the need for businesses and governments to improve the integrity and provenance of pharmaceutical products and medical supplies, but also other goods such as food, good industrial consumer products, of course. And third, this pandemic has shown that going digital is a must. It's no longer an option, it's a must. The pandemic has changed consumer behavior, so we're now shopping online much more than we used to do, and online retail sales have been skyrocketing, but also companies' behavior, because they now need an online presence for those who didn't have one, but also they realized that they had no choice but to go digital to ensure the continuity of their business and trade operations. Now, as we all know, trade still heavily relies on paper, and this reliance on paper proved particularly damaging during the current pandemic, making it very difficult and sometimes even impossible to complete trade transactions. And so a number of companies have gone digital, including banks involved in trade finance that had been rather reluctant to move towards digital. They took their own measures because they had no other choice. They took their own measures to relax internal rules on original documentation, to expand the use of e-signatures, e-documents, expand digital channels. So while over the past decades, discussions around optimizing supply chains have focused primarily on cost and efficiency, the future of supply chains will need to begin factoring resilience into their calculations. And how can we build resilience? Well, digitalization can play a critical role, but not any digitalization. It has to be digitalization that is highly secure. And this is, in that respect, that blockchain offers interesting opportunities. So there are many DLT projects that have been developed in response to the current challenges posed by the COVID pandemic. For example, to detect COVID cases, the WHO, World Health Organization, has identified blockchain as the technology of choice to build a platform to fight COVID-19, which is called MiPassa, and I believe that Blanca will talk about it. It's being used to track and manage donations for e-procurement, but I will focus more on examples that directly relate to trade. So if you could move to the next slide, please. So why is blockchain so interesting? Because it provides an open, tamper-proof distributed record of transactions. It increases accuracy, efficiency, and transparency. And so it allows people to connect without intermediary in quasi-real time and in a highly secure environment, so it allows to build trust. And this is particularly important in international trade when there are many documents required and many people involved in a single trade transaction. Now, blockchain can be particularly interesting for transparency purposes. It allows for greater transparency into how goods are being processed for three main purposes, I would say. First, to increase transparency for customers and to build consumers' trust. So if you go and buy chicken in your favorite supermarket, you can you have the possibility if blockchain is being used to know where the chicken comes from, which company has processed it, when it arrived, etc. So there's more transparency into how goods are being produced. It can prove the authenticity of products and help fight counterfeits. And I mentioned the different counterfeit scandals related to masks. And there are, as a matter of fact, many different companies that use blockchain to prove the authenticity of their products. And a lot of luxury brands, LVMH is one of them. It has been used for diamonds every ledger. So this is one of the key use cases, but also to track tainted products. Walmart, for example, uses it for that purpose, and they can track tainted products within just a matter of seconds instead of taking days to do so. So in the case of the current pandemic, in the current context, blockchain could help hospitals and healthcare organizations trace products through supply chains and ensure that they are authentic, that they meet international standards, and it could help flag potential issues. And as a matter of fact, Swiss hospitals, for example, have devised a blockchain-based system to track medical device routes with all transactions being stored on the blockchain. It's also being used extensively for the digitalization of trade documents and trade transactions. Trade documents like the e-bill of lading are difficult to digitalize and to avoid the double spending problem. You don't want, it's a document of title, the e-bill of lading, so you don't want this document to be copied. And this is where blockchain offers interesting opportunities because it solves this double spending issue. It proves the authenticity of the document, but also to enhance the efficiency of a number of processes. And if you could move to the next slide, and then we'll come back to this one. So to enhance the efficiency of processes, be it related to trade finance, transportation, logistics, or even customs clearance. And I've worked with Trade Finance Global to try and map the different projects out there, and there are quite a few. I've put here a revised version of the mapping that we published last year. It's not the final version yet. The final version will be published in the coming weeks, so please do not circulate this slide. But it gives you an idea of the breadth of the projects that currently exist and the potential of the technology to remove frictions from international trade. But it also shows you, given the number of projects out there, that we have a problem, which is a digital island problem. These projects use different technologies. They have their own approaches. They have their own processes. They have their own governance models. And we need to work on solving these interoperability issues, both at a technical level, but also at a business level and at a regulatory level, if we really want to remove frictions end to end for international trade. If you could go back to the previous slide, please. Now, blockchain is also interesting to show greater transparency into business operations, and this is particularly interesting for SMEs who face challenges accessing trade finance, very often because they lack a credit history. It's not the only issue, but it's one of the key issues. And here, blockchain, because of the traceability dimension, can help. And you have some projects that are that were mentioned on the next slide, like fast track trade, for example, that help to address this problem. Now, the question of trusted suppliers is also critical. As I said, agile supply chains are essential to alleviate disruptions. And a key element of agile supply chain is a mutually recognized digital identity system. And here, blockchain offers interesting opportunities because it allows for trusted supplier information in digital identity. And Jörn will touch upon this, so I won't say more for the time being, just to flag that supply chain disruptions because of COVID gave rise to various trust your supplier schemes using blockchain, like the IBM Rapid Supplier Connect project. And finally, it opens interesting opportunities for digital payment. And here Blanca will talk about it. So same thing, I won't spend too much time. I've already talked long enough. So if you could move 2 slides ahead to the conclusion, just to reiterate that blockchain offers very interesting, potential interesting opportunities to alleviate supply chain disruptions of the type we've just experienced over the past few months. But I think it's important to say it's not the panacea, and blockchain DLC is only a tool to make it a reality. If you really want to remove frictions from international trade and have this technology make a difference for supply chain, we need to work on standardization to solve this interoperability problem I mentioned, at a technical level, but we also need for the law to keep up with innovation. And this is where organizations like the WTO, like UNCITRAL, like the ICC have a key role to play to support the deployment of this technology, which I believe has a great potential for international trade. And this is how it can help build resilience to future shocks. Thank you very much. Emily, back to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Emmanuel. So just a reminder, if you have any questions, guys, feel free to post them in the Q&A section, and we will tackle them around 11:45 or maybe a bit later, because it seems that we're running a bit longer than planned. But we'll be very happy to take your questions at the Q&A, so feel free to already write them right now in the Q&A section. So now we're going to move on to our second speaker, Jörn Ergut, who is a consultant on blockchain, smart contracts, and data protection. He's also a lecturer at the Geneva School of Diplomacy and the Universities of Geneva, Lucerne, and St. Gallen. So today, Jörn is going to talk about how tracing and decentralized identity can encourage international trade and what other technical tools blockchain technology can provide. So he's going to give us an overview of decentralized identity based on DLT, distributed ledger technology, and he's going to shed some light on the work of the International Telecommunication Union, the ITU, and other standard developing organizations. So basically, we're going to have this big question today: how can standards and member countries help to mitigate COVID and other crises? Jörn, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Emily. And also thank you, Emmanuel, for providing those great examples where blockchain is already used. I will first take a little step back and see why we need blockchain. A digital world, especially a world with COVID-19, needs trust. It is important that we can rely on drugs, masks, and vaccines to fight COVID-19. We must be sure that all these are real and not counterfeited. In the age of AI and deep fakes, it is possible to forge any voice, video, or image of a handwritten letter. So by digitizing things, we lose trust. So we need a new means for trust in the digital world. Cryptographic signatures are an important element here. However, this is not enough. We've seen corruption on every level of institution. Therefore, we need to base trust on a broader, decentralized basis. This is the reason why central bank digital currencies, tracking of goods, certificates, smart contracts, and identity all look at blockchain as a provider of trust. Decentralized trust is based on blockchain. When I talk about blockchain, maybe you think about Bitcoin. However, blockchain does not necessarily mean this anonymous framework of decentralized trust. Today, we are mostly talking about decentralized trust as a group of known and trustworthy actors. This combines the advantages of conventional trust that is directed towards trusted entities and the advantages of decentralization. So basically, we take the principle of blockchain and combine it with the conventional trust we already know. So today, I would like to focus on identity. A digital identity is important for participation and inclusion in a digital world. Unfortunately, there are more than 1 billion people on Earth that do not have a recognized identity. This excludes them from even basic participation in our increasingly digital society. Decentralized identity is often focusing on this issue, which is, of course, a very important one. However, for goods, decentralized identity and digital identity is important as well. Only a digital identity of goods can allow digital identification, tracking, and verification of goods traded. so-called digital twins can reduce forgery and can speed up trade. However, digital identity also introduces new risks. As I said in the beginning, there's a risk of counterfeiting, but also the risks are even broader than that. Who controls our digital identity? Digital identity needs to be secure against identity theft, which obviously exists for humans as well as for things, but also secured against monopolies and single nation states that could otherwise block trade worldwide. We don't need a new monopoly that is controlling global trade. We need to secure against that, and blockchain can provide this. When we talk about identity for people, there is a risk to privacy and data protection. Again, this is an issue for goods as well. We need to protect business confidentiality. Therefore, we need the concept of blockchain-based decentralized identity that empowers the identity holder while providing solid protection against interference of single actors, like some corporations that operates an IT system or a foreign government trying to interfere. Decentralized systems provide the ability of controlled and distributed governance. So it provides basically self-sovereign identity to companies, to actors, as well as people. Identity needs to be used globally. Paper passports or bill of ladings are recognized worldwide. The digital identity also needs global recognition. Therefore, standards are created to ensure interoperability. Many standards organizations and international organizations are addressing this issue. For example, the World Wide Web Consortium, W3C, has developed a standard for decentralized identity and verified credentials. ISO developed TC 307. ITU has published the report of the Focus Group of Decentralized Ledger Technology and is now working on standards in Q22 of Study Group 16. UNECE is preparing a report on blockchain interoperability. National standard bodies are also active. For example, the German DIN has created DIN Spec 4997 on privacy by blockchain design. And there are industry standards like ESC20 for tokens and many more. This landscape is evolving fast, and a huge number of actors are creating standards for different industries. But also governments are taking the lead. For example, the EU with the European Blockchain Service Infrastructure and the European Self-Sovereign Identity Framework. Central banks are advancing. Many actors are advancing, and it is very important to coordinate this process properly. And I think WTO can play an important role here and help to coordinate global standards and advance trade this way. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jürgen. So guys, you are actually 1 minute early, so you you were great on the timing. Thank you, Jürgen. So I do not see questions yet on the Q&A. Maybe it's because Antonio is moderating them. But as I said, feel free to post your questions. We will be very happy to discuss them, even if it's maybe you might think that it's a silly questions, but there are no silly questions, especially in a technology as complex as blockchain. So, I mean, for example, in the Q&A, I'm going to ask you to kind of tell us a real life example of, what you were talking about. You're talking about decentralized trust, distributed governance, and, these are all very big terms and very big concepts, but it would be really cool to kind of hear how this can impact people in the everyday life, and kind of that you explain to us a process, an imaginary example, in a futuristic society, how exactly can people use this in their everyday life. So I'd like to ask you this kind of questions here, and when we get to the to the Q&A. So I see people asking questions now. Thank you very much. We'll get to these later. All right, so now we're going to move on to our third speaker, Blanca Tsuta, who is an associate founding member of ITSA, the International Token Standardization Association. She's also a member of the CBDC and Monetary Policy Task Force within the regulatory group of the Crypto Valley Association. So today, Blanca will talk about how the current pandemic impacts international trade. She will provide us with some insights and raise the question how far the private sector can be of help. Blanca will also highlight challenges and opportunities regarding e-commerce and the potential of digital payments. So one big question she's going to answer today, try to answer. What are the responses from international organizations in this context? Blanca, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Emily. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. As Emmanuel and George have said, the pandemic has increased online demands for goods and services and has caused several challenges, such as the disruption in supply chains, the difficulties for some countries to access or collect data, and changes in consumer behavior, adopting digital payments and new ways of doing things. Next slide, please. So multilateral organizations are making available funds to affected countries, providing systems to facilitate cross-border processes, and useful guidelines to deal with challenges at the borders and support entrepreneurs, such as the Web Blockchain Toolkit or WCO classification list to facilitate processes at the customs. Next slide, please. At the government level, governments are exploring, planning, or piloting blockchain projects in partnership with the private sector, and mostly in Europe and China. For example, they have set regulatory sandboxes platforms to allow businesses to pilot systems, such as in UK, Germany, and Rwanda, for example. The European agriculture is also becoming smarter. The FSIM project is developing a data platform for food certification covering 8 EU countries and with a budget of 6.5 million euros. So those platforms are built on top of different blockchain protocols, which raises interoperability and the standard issues that John raised previously, the concern raised by John previously. Next slide, please. So many businesses are implementing DLT solutions to address the supply chain inefficiencies, data collection challenges, and changes in consumer behavior. 7 of the top 10 companies and 46% of global blockchain patents come from China, mostly from Alibaba, with 1,500 patents in the first half of this year. Tencent and more than 800 patents, and Inspur Group 274. IBM only got the 4th place with 251 applications, just to give you a level of innovation. In Europe, for example, TeamLens is a platform developed in partnership with the Dutch government that maps and analyzes the medical supply chain, reducing costs, quality issues, and frauds. MIPASA, as I said previously by Emmanuel, is a WHO data hub that uses data analytics and privacy tools from financial institutions and adapt them for the COVID health context. So MIPASA is built on top of Hyperledger Fabric in partnership with IBM, Oracle, Enterprise Blockchain Platform, Hasera, and Microsoft. And it aims to be fully private and share information between large organizations like state authorities and health officials. There are also innovative projects trying to respond to changes in consumer behavior, such as blockchain-based social networks and crypto assets to e-commerce, allowing digital transactions in fiat and crypto, such as Shoperion and CoinLinked. And also a supply chain finance platform, Change, helps SMEs to apply for loans based on receivables from large companies. So as you see, businesses need to take all these challenges because these solutions have raised several challenges related to consumer protection, data privacy, and security. And it's the role of businesses also to take these challenges into account when they design new solutions. Next slide, please. So what is the potential for digital payments in e-commerce and most especially CBDCs and stable coins? So to start a CBDC is a sovereign digital currency issued by a central bank. There are two types: wholesale CBDCs, used for payments between financial institutions, and retail CBDCs for general use by the public and businesses. So stablecoins, on the other side, are privately issued digital currencies pegged to fiat, to crypto, or to an algorithm in some cases. So since the announcement of Libra, CBDCs are on top of the agenda. A recent BIS report states that 10% of central banks will launch a CBDC in the next 2 to 3 years. So there are currently 67 central banks exploring, testing, or launching new pilots. In China, for example, salaries are being paid with digital yuans in 4 major cities, and Bahamas expect to launch their CBDC next month. MasterCard has also built a testing platform to assess, explore CBDCs. And there are also regional CBDC pilots in the Caribbean region. Libra recently announced CBDC integration. That means that a Libra euro could be replaced by a CBDC issued by an European central bank, for example. So there are many benefits from CBDCs and stable coins, such as inclusiveness, reduce of crime, etc. But first mover in this space could win long-term geopolitical advantage if they are adopted broadly. If Libra penetrates emerging markets and e-commerce, it can completely revolutionize the sector. So knowing that 47% of online shoppers live in China, a CBDC integrated in e-commerce could be the case in China and could be potentially be the case with Libra and other stablecoins in other countries. However, multiple CBDCs could also affect efficiency in cross-border payments and impact domestic economic activity and monetary policy. So a multilateral approach is needed to coordinate policy efforts around CBDC and stablecoins and integrate those topics in international trade discussions. Next slide, please. So what lessons we can draw from this crisis? This crisis has shown that we need collaboration among all stakeholders and targeted responses to address the different phases of the COVID-19 shock. In the economic restart or recovery phase, we need effective policy responses that first promote interoperability and harmonized standards. We need innovative business solutions integrating new digital currencies, consumer protection, data privacy, and security risk. We also need training and capacity building for all stakeholders to build trust in emerging technologies, encourage MSMEs, and most especially women entrepreneurs to trade cross-border. We need also agile international organizations with a clear mandate from countries to help them evaluate policies regarding DLT and crypto assets, and also help developing countries build their capacity in emerging technologies, digital payments, and its impact in trade. So this can boost trade negotiations, for example, on e-commerce, and lower barriers for cross-border digital payments. Recently, Germany explores the possibility to create an international dispute resolution authority to address conflicts in blockchain-based digital services. The WTO can play a role expanding this approach at the multilateral level. So finally, countries need to ensure the resilience of supply chains, and this can be done by supporting investment in smart cities and providing guarantees and incentives for insurances and private equity to fund impacted companies. So to conclude, my key message will be that a new world is on the horizon, and there will be no other opportunities like this one for blockchain, DLT, and international trade. The greatest innovations are ahead of us and not behind us. And we need supportive governments with clear strategies, innovative entrepreneurs, qualified policymakers, and agile multilateral organizations to embrace this opportunity and make this work much better and smarter. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Blanca. So before we go to our last speaker, I would like to again remind you that you can ask questions in the Q&A that we're going to tackle right after this presentation. But also, I would like actually to go to a poll, if that's okay with you, Antonio. Could you please ask the question here, what industry or sector do you work in? It would be really nice to know more about our audience, because here we're talking a lot about international organizations, so I think it would be pretty interesting to see where the audience is working. So Antonio, if you can please launch the question, what industry or sector do you work in? Are you there, Antonio?
Otherwise, you can also. Okay.
Perfect, perfect. So we have a few options. We don't have the options in here. So basically, do you guys work in an NGO, an IGO, at the government, in business, or in academia? Maybe it's gonna be tough if we don't have the poll options. Well, it's fine. You know, let's. So sorry about that. So that is not gonna work. Okay, so we're just gonna switch then to the next speaker. Robert Zapfel is our next and last speaker. He is a serial entrepreneur and a computer scientist. During his several successful startups, he gathered over 3 decades of experience in the IT, fintech, telecom, renewable energy, venture capital, incubation, and business acceleration sectors. So Robert Zapfel is a true polymath, and today, during his presentation, he is going to talk about how we can tackle the bullwhip effect in supply chains. So you might not know what the bullwhip effect is, but this is a phenomenon that apparently we cannot afford to ignore. So Robert is going to highlight today how the pandemic increases this bullwhip effect on global supply chains, and he's going to discuss measures to mitigate it, even under the current extreme conditions. Robert, up to you.
Thank you very much, Emily, and thank you for the invitation today, and to these brilliant speakers. Thank you. Yeah, last but not least, let's dive a little bit into the inner workings of supply chain. And as you already mentioned, Emily, I'm going to talk about the bullwhip effect. Not sure if you have ever heard about this phenomenon. It's something that occurs on the supply chain where variations of order quantities increase up the supply chain from retailer to distribution and production levels. That's interesting because it seems to be a phenomenon without an actual and obvious cause. Let me tell you a small story how this started. In the early 1990s, Procter & Gamble faced the problem of extreme demand variations for one of its best-selling brands, Pampers diapers. So the logistics executives of Procter & Gamble examined the order rates of Pampers across the supply chain. So the purchase rate showed only little variations in demand at the consumer end. The logistics executives found that the variations of order amplifies from the retailer level to the distributor and manufacturer level. And that left Procter & Gamble facing a respectable variation in order quantities. They were the first to call this a bullwhip effect. It comes from this bullwhip that increases in amplitude to the tail. Well, I mean, you can imagine that such a bullwhip effect can cause great inefficiencies and cost through excess inventory, through lost revenue, superfluous capacity, or poor customer service. For these reasons, the phenomenon has received strong attention from researchers and from practitioners for almost 2 decades already. Hence, we think we know a great deal of the factors that can cause a bullwhip effect and what we can do to reduce it. The question remains, can we really reduce it? Now let's have a closer look to the current mitigation strategies. Over the past years, companies have put great effort in understanding the causes of the bullwhip effect to reduce the damages it causes. They invested in better IT solutions and tried to implement collective efforts. Point of sale data sharing strategies, vendor managed inventory, and collaborative planning and forecasting have been developed as tools to reduce the effect of the amplification. Well, according to a study that has been carried out by Professor Seifert and Isaacson of the IMD, where they monitored 15,000 companies over many years, a significant bullwhip effect was observed across industries like mining, manufacturing, wholesale, and retail. There was no significant decrease in bullwhip effect over time, even with the mentioned mitigation strategies applied. So for example, a reduction of fixed ordering costs through electronic data exchange and consolidated truck loading was practiced without significant effects. Information sharing and lead time reduction was meant to mitigate the effects, but again, without significant effects. Everyday low prices and framework purchase contracts were introduced at the detail level to lower the bullwhip, without, you guessed it, significant effects. Allocating scarce products early and capacity reservations were practiced at the manufacturer end and, again, no surprise, without showing significant effects. All those measures invented and implemented, they build on information exchange along a supply chain. And that's a problem because this is feasible within groups of companies or befriended companies. That's become utterly infeasible through globalization and shortage gamings that are being played where margins are being put under pressure. And meanwhile, the supply chain itself, and not the company, is increasingly seen as a unit of competition. Now, information asymmetry is the obvious root cause blocking the mitigation of the bullwhip effect. It's a result of a huge barrier of distrust that exists between stakeholders in global markets, and it causes data silos and unfair advantages. Now, when we want to tear down the barriers of distrust, we actually need to dissolve those data silos and we need to enable an information exchange between and within supply chains. But at the same time, stakeholders demand the protection of their customer base in statistics. To solve that riddle, we should look at privacy preserving methodologies. Now, just to be precise, if we talk about tearing down data silos, if we talk about enabling a privacy-preserving exchange of information, and we want to do that in a shared ecosystem, makes sense, right? That means we are actually talking about the properties of a distributed ledger technology. Let's just look at the attributes that I have put for you on this slide. First, neutrality. Neutrality is required, obviously, for a shared ecosystem to tackle our barrier of distrust. Imagine when a single entity managed a shared ecosystem as a service provider, then where's a guarantee that such a service would be provided without bias? It would be risking the leaking of data or substantial, may I say, substantial influencing by certain stakeholders to introduce unfair advantages. And finally, it would mean to build the next data giant, if you wish, a Google of supply chain information exchange. That's what we don't want. So the decentralized and democratized nature of distributed ledger technology, that can effectively mitigate that. Now, second term would be immutability. Now imagine you have an information exchange that's mutable. Nobody can rely on that, right? So it's required for a shared ecosystem to trust the information exchange has not been tampered with. Again, imagine a single service provider is prone to manipulation, rendering a shared ecosystem futile and eliminating any willingness to vote, right? So strong cryptography nowadays allows distributed ledger technology to guarantee both data originality, but also data provenance. Don't forget about provenance again. Now, our third term is ubiquity. And it's quite logic. If it's not there, you can't use it. So ubiquity is an obvious property of a shared ecosystem. This is a typical quality of distributed ledgers technology again. So where operations are distributed across many nodes, making the shared ecosystem available everywhere and anytime. Now, my favorite term, last but again not least, is the privacy. Privacy preservation is paramount, we believe, for our shared ecosystem to function. Look, each of the ecosystem participants need to be able to draw information about market demand early. And at the same time, and that's the kind of oxymoron we've elaborated before, at the same time, the data has to be anonymized and aggregated so that no intelligence can be drawn from the data about all of the competitors, because we want to effectively avoid unfair advantages. Luckily, I must say that state-of-the-art cryptography comes with effective methods to provide such privacy preservation. I mean, if you're interested in the maths, I could mention homomorphic encryption, multi-party computation, elliptic curve pairing, or whatever that is. Just get in touch if you want to know more about that. Distributed ledger technology, I need to mention, was one of the early adopters of such cryptography, and hence it can guarantee some battle-proof maturity already. Now let me close that, because we have seen that in the current pandemic, we've seen the bullwhip effect just exaggerating and causing the empty shelves. So I think that now creates some momentum where we can introduce distributed ledger technology. And we believe that distributed ledger technology can effectively mitigate the bullwhip effect, and it can help to build a new normal, and it can help have us prepared for upcoming pandemics. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Robert. Thank you for your presentation. So this was our last presentation. We are kind of on time, 3 minutes late, so that's still pretty good. And so now it is time to start the Q&A. Once again, to the people in the audience, so we have 47 participants. Feel free to ask your questions, even if you feel they're off topic, stupid, silly, whatever. Ask your questions. We'll be really happy to take them. This is, after all, a conversation. And if you have anything that you want to add, maybe pertaining to your own experience with this technology or in international organization, international trade, feel free to, even if you just want to share your experience, we'd be very happy to have this conversation with you. Before we go on to the Q&A, I'd like to ask another poll. So Antonio, get ready. So we have submitted this question: is blockchain a threat or opportunity for developing countries? So we have three options for this poll. A, is it an opportunity? Is it a threat? Or are you undecided? Do you think, Antonio, you could start this poll? Perfect, perfect. So the question is: blockchain a threat or an opportunity for developing countries? All right, I'm gonna give you maybe a few more seconds and then we're gonna close the poll. 3. All right, Antonio, can you please close the poll and show us the results? All right, so we have almost 50% of people who think it is an opportunity, that blockchain is an opportunity for developing countries. We still have a lot of undecided and no answer, but we have no one who said it was a threat. So I guess people here seem pretty enthusiastic about blockchain. So that is pretty cool. Okay, so we have only 2 questions as of now. Please feel free to ask more questions. Maybe I'd like to go back to this question I had for Jörn. So I told you in advance, Jörn, so you had time to prepare. So you were mentioning very complicated concepts: decentralized trust, distributed governance. So if imagine that here we have everyday people here in the audience. Maybe we don't know about blockchain technology. Can you just imagine a futuristic utopian world where citizens are in control of their identities? Could you give us an imaginary example of the things you could do in real life with this tech, with the control of your identity, with distributed governance? Something that's easy to understand in the everyday life.
Okay. Actually, this question is new to me, but it's a very good question, so I'm happy to answer it. And basically, we need digital trust in order to keep on doing the same things we are doing currently in the analog world. So what a lot of people don't see is with the digital world, we are losing trust because we use digital version of documents and they don't have the trust. They can be easily forged. So we need a way to basically preserve the trust we already have. And of course, when you look at technology, it means that we cannot only preserve the trust, but also to increase the trust. But the first step is we need it to preserve the trust. Otherwise, the digital world wouldn't function, wouldn't provide the trust it needs to work.
So I'm gonna play the devil's advocate here. Why can't I trust the digital world right now? I mean, right now I have my identity, I do my e-démarche, with the Geneva Canton, and all is well. Why shouldn't I trust it?
Okay, so for example, if you if you don't have any kind of digital signature, of course, then you don't have any trust. If you use centralized systems, of course, we can authenticate against Google, we can use government systems, we can use Facebook, etc. But they are in control.
Mm-hmm.
They can provide us all the functionality we need, and it works fine. But once you violate the terms and conditions of Google, your account gets blocked. And even if you don't violate their terms and conditions, but they just think you violated them, your account gets blocked. And as a company, this can be very harmful. And think about sanctions regime. Currently, there are some countries, an increasing number of countries, that use sanctions against other countries. And if these countries do not only control their trade, but control global trade, this is an increasing risk that a country, a hacker, a corporation, a monopoly, they could just block your entire operation of the company. So, of course, digitalization offers a huge range of opportunities in everyday life, in trade, etc. We have seen with COVID-19 that this is needed and this is working, but we need to secure it as well.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, sanctions are not always bad. We must sanction bad actors. But, and this is the real issue on the table, we have to define the governance. Who is going to decide what is going to happen? And in first generation anonymous blockchains, there was just a group of decentralized actors, and we didn't have a government rule who is going to decide what. We just said we distribute it among a lot of people, and therefore the decision will be about right. And of course, this is not how democracy should work. So we need to define the actors. Still, we need to have many actors and not just one actors, and we need to define the rules.
Mm-hmm.
And this is basically what WTO should do and has been doing in the analog world. So we need to define the rules of global trade governance, of global systems that work globally, that are independent from single actors, but still, of course, need governance in order to block bad actors and to protect good actors from other bad actors.
Mm-hmm. So basically, it's kind of bringing the democratic principles to trade to all these global companies, these global actors that actually have a lot of power over their consumers, over the people who partake in these systems. And with decentralized trust, it would be a way to make this more democratic, to give more power over their data, over their purchases, over everything to the people who actually use it. Is that correct?
Well, it's power to the individual who should control their own identity. It can be democracy in its direct meaning, but also it can be the rules of global governance, as we know it in WTO, where we have member countries who control things and who basically cannot just be overruled by a single country who has control of the IT systems.
Okay, well, thank you very much for this clarification. I'd like to move on to a question for Emmanuel, but I guess the question can kind of be to everyone. So Emmanuel, you were saying,
If I can jump just on this, on what
Sure.
John has said, yes. I think also I align with what has been said, that we need also to bring far more diverse voices to the table. Currently, there are 4 ways to looking at standards. For example, we have blockchain research institutes, blockchain interoperability alliances, blockchain initiatives such as the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance, for example, and many NGOs such as ISA in Cyprus, the Geneva Macrolax, etc. So we have all these 4 sections, not especially communicating between them. So maybe we could also get inspired with what has been done when the internet was launched. We have a global governance network composed by standard networks, knowledge networks, delivery networks, networked institutions, watchdog networks, advocacy networks, and policy networks. So maybe now it's the moment to get inspired a little bit what has been done in the past during the launch of the internet and transform these 4 ways, separate ways of looking at standards in more coordinated ways.
Okay, thank you very much. Anyone, would you like to add something, Emmanuel or Robert, maybe, or should I move on to the next question?
Yeah, I mean, just to say that I completely agree with that. And I mean, there is a need for greater coordination and for some sort of governance system to be put in place. The irony, I mean, everybody's talking about standards, but I mean, Jörn showed this slide that was interesting with some of the initiatives out there, but there are more than that. And we end up in a situation where there are so many standardization initiatives that are not connected with each other, that sort of will need a global body to really coordinate these different standardization initiatives to make sense and make sure that we all work in the same direction. And this is where I believe there's a role for international organizations, but it cannot be just for one international organization to play that role, just because, like Blanca was saying, you have different types of stakeholders. You have the private sector, you have the public sector. So I think we need to put in place a governance system that brings together the public and the private sector, sort of public-private cooperation, collaboration on these issues to try and all move in the same direction and indeed learn from what was done in the past with the internet. But I think we also have to draw the lessons and try to do it better.
Yeah, so that interoperability and standardization shouldn't be only on the protocol level, but also on the business level, and to kind of all agree and be able to function together. Thank you very much. So, Emmanuel, while I have you here, so you were in your presentation, you mentioned that blockchain, helps to bring greater transparency of products, helps to trace products throughout supply chains. But there's one thing that we often say is gigot, right? Garbage in, garbage out, and there is this vulnerability that if someone puts fake information on chain, then you just store fake information in a way that's unreliable. And basically, if you write shenanigans on blockchain, then shenanigans are going to come out. So are there a way to fight this vulnerability?
Yeah, I mean, as you said, I mean, this is a key vulnerability, garbage in, garbage out. And indeed, the information you have on the blockchain is only as good as the information that was entered.
Yeah.
So we have to make sure that the information that is entered is of good quality. There are different ways of doing it, and it also very much depends on the information that is added to the blockchain. If you think of diamonds, for example, you were mentioning track and trace. Now, Everledger was one of the first initiatives using blockchain for track and trace for diamonds. Now, a diamond is unique. Each diamond is unique. So basically, if you scan the diamond, you have a unique identity for that diamond that you can put on the blockchain. So this is pretty much straightforward. But in other cases, if you want to prove whether some sustainability or ethical criteria have been respected, you will need to put in place these mechanisms of control before the information is entered onto the blockchain. Otherwise, I mean, the blockchain is not a magical tool, right? It's not a panacea in that case. So you still need a number of controls that are put in place before the information is entered onto the blockchain to ensure that the right information or that good quality information is entered. You have, depending on what the product or the data is, I mean, there are different approaches. I mean, you have some companies developing crypto anchors, for example, so that you can track the product along the supply chain, make sure that that the information that is entered onto the blockchain is of good quality. You have different ways of going about it, but it's not a one-size-fits-all. It pretty much depends on the issue you're working on and the type of information you want to add to the blockchain, the products concerned, for example, or the activity concerned.
Okay, thank you. Any of the speakers would like to add something before I move on to the next question?
Maybe
Yes,
I
it
could.
is. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay. I would like to add accountability to the equation, actually. Maybe this is exactly the same what you wanted to mention, Jan. So if you combine data with identity, then you can hold the creator that put the data on blockchain accountable for it. As we do it nowadays, somebody signs a document and the signatory is actually accountable for that. Now, I strongly believe that we need to have both. We can't just put data on blockchain because we can put any garbage on blockchain. We cannot take great efforts to make sure that this is not garbage. But I think one additional approach, a very strong approach, could be to hold the data creator, the person or the entity or the thing that has put the data on blockchain accountable for that. And therefore, we need the identity. Over to you, Jan.
Yeah, basically that's the point. If you take a look at the handwritten signature, how it works right now, so you can be sure that this person has signed it. At least if you take some effort and if you do some analysis. And of course, anybody could sign any garbage, any nonsense. This is possible, but they are accountable, and you know that they did sign it, and you know that it has not been altered. More or less in the analog world and the digital world, you can be sure that it has not been altered. So this is basically the importance of the digital proof and digital identity, that you know who has certified what, and this is has not been tampered with. We can't solve everything. We will not solve the issue that people are certifying wrong things, that they're doing wrong statements, but we can, and of course, solve a lot of issues around digital certificates that exist today.
Okay, thank you, Jörn. Thank you. So we have a question from the audience. We might have already answered it, but I'm still gonna ask, and maybe you'd like to add something. So the question is from, I'm sorry for how I'm about to pronounce your name, Shang Xin Kuai. And so they're asking, can you elaborate the issue of standardization? Is interoperability necessary for supply chain to adopt blockchain? And what might be the challenges? Is there something we want to add on this question?
No, I could potentially jump in here and add interoperability. I think you're absolutely right. When we look at standardization, it normally goes at a much lower pace. Standardization takes time, and rightly so, to include as many stakeholders, as many opinions as possible, and then come up with one standard. Just a handful of standards, but not as many as we see nowadays. This, I think, is owed to quite a high pace at which these standards are emerging today. It's good on one hand because we see that we have a strong interest in adoption of blockchain-based, DLT-based systems. And when I talk about an ecosystem, which I like to talk about ecosystems when I talk about DLT systems, then you have plenty stakeholders, and all they have to work together. So you need standards. So that creates some pressure and increases the pace. And if people become impatient, they start the next and the second next and the third next standard. Now all of a sudden, within months or 2 years, we've got like 30 standards already. And if you look at the normal NIST procedures, they take like 3, 4, 5 times for years for one standard. We don't take that time. And I think there's nothing wrong with it in particular, but adding to the equation interoperability, and this is an ubiquitous term already, interoperability amongst between standards is one valid approach to tackle that.
Thank you, Robert. Something to
If
add?
I may jump in. I mean, the term standardization and interoperability they're sort of catch-all terms. I mean, they mean different things. And I think it's important to bear that in mind, because we're not talking about just developing, or making sure that the platforms that I showed, the different platforms that exist, talk to each other at a technical level. It's more than that. You have the technical interoperability, yes, because you have different DLTs being used that have their own consensus, that have their own way of storing the information, that have their own way of validating the transactions. So that's one aspect, and there's a lot of work being done on that. But you also have a lot of work that needs to be done when it comes to international trade, and that's to answer the question that you asked, Emily, that was posted by one of the participants, in terms of data models and processes. When you look at international trade, there are on average 10 to 20 documents at least that are needed for an international trade transaction, more than 20 actors being involved. And the same information is entered several times on these different documents, with each time specific characteristics in terms of length, for example. But if you look at these different documents, at the end of the day, you have about 80 data elements that come back all the time. And what we need, if we really want to remove frictions, is to develop data models on these different aspects, on the documents, on these data elements, and agree on a common approach. And as Robert was saying, yes, there are many initiatives out there. If you look at e-invoicing, I mean, there are more than 30 different standards that exist. What I think we need at this stage is to bring around the same table all the different actors and try to agree on the best approach, and have some real work done on data models, on processes that span the entire supply chain, from one end of the supply chain to the other. So looking at all the different documents that are required, looking at all the different processes, and try to come to an agreement all together, all the different actors being involved. And this is why I was talking about this public-private collaboration that in my view is critical in that respect, because that can only be done at fairly global level. And when it comes to the governance models of the platforms, I mean, this is more on an ad hoc basis. And then the last dimension of interoperability is actually the regulatory interoperability, because what we see right now is that different jurisdictions go their own way. And so we have a risk of regulatory fragmentation. And I think working on these issues is important if we want to build a regulatory framework that truly supports the development of the technology. So it's not only about recognition of e-signatures and e-documents, which is critical, and we only have about, I think, 60 countries around the world having some sort of legislation on e-signatures and e-documents. It's also the question of recognition or legal status of blockchain transactions, smart contracts, etc. And it's transposing some texts that exist, like the UN trial model on electronic transferable records, that solves this issue of double spending. So it's transposing these texts that already exist into national legislation. Now, that text was adopted in the summer of 2017, but it has been adopted only by one country so far, and there's another one, so it's Bahrain, and there's Singapore also working on it right now. But I think we need to make sure that the regulators step in and support the deployment of this technology by putting in place the right legal tools. So the legal tools that are needed for the deployment of the technology in international trade.
All right, thank you very much, Emmanuel. Well, kind of a follow-up question that is more concrete comes from Olivera Josic. What should be the concrete role of the WTO with respect to blockchain? Should it be regulation, standardization, or should it be something else? So the concrete role of the WTO.
Well, the WTO is not a standard-setting body. It's a rules-based organization. What we can do is help promote the development of a regulatory framework that is conducive to the development of this technology and put in place a number of rules. This being said, I think the WTO can work with other entities working on blockchain, including trying to advance the work on standards, but it won't be in the driving seat because it's not its primary purpose. But I think playing the role of facilitator and of convener of the different stakeholders is something that is important and that can be done. This is what I've been trying to do to a certain extent by organizing events at the WTO on blockchain and global trade, and trying to bring together the different international organizations that work on these issues, a number of private stakeholders, those having launched initiative related to trade, and the regulators. And I think this dialogue is critical. It's important because, as was said a bit earlier, blockchain is a technology that is difficult to apprehend, but that could have a truly transformative impact. And I think it's important for trade officials to understand both the potential of the technology, but also the challenges, the limitations, and then from there see what can be done at a regulatory level.
Okay, thank you. Does someone want to add something to this?
Yes, please. I think when you talk about regulation, it's not just about saying this is dangerous, we must regulate it, but also we must give it a legal basis. So it can have legal recognition. And also to, when I think about the WTO, I think WTO could play an important role in governance of those systems. So when we have global systems, I think we need a global organization that could do it. Of course, for standards, technical standards, we have a lot of other bodies who are doing a good job. Again, we need coordination there. We need to legally endorse maybe or require certain standards, and therefore then we are again talking about the WTO taking a role here.
If I can jump in and go back to the first point that you made, Jörn, I completely agree. I think it's important to look at regulation as an enabler. And when I was talking about recognition of e-signatures and e-documents, for example, I mean, you can have a great digital technology, but the matter is that if your legislation does not provide for the recognition of e-signatures and e-documents, you won't go very far. So this is one typical example of where regulation is an enabler and where the WTO can play a role. And as a matter of fact, there are discussions on that in the context of the e-commerce joint statement initiative on the question of recognition of e-signatures and e-documents. So yes, very important, as you were saying, Jörn, to look at regulation as something that can empower the technology and not only put barriers, which is very often how people see it, unfortunately.
Something else to add before we move on to the next question? All right. So I have a question which I'm not sure to understand. So please, speakers, help me if I pronounce this incorrectly. So how much of a challenge, so this question is from Nathan Dennis. How much of a challenge does tech debt in existing logistics and customs systems present in implementing digital transformation with blockchain? and this in particular, the accelerated changes facing the UK in January 2021. So how much of a challenge does tech debt in existing logistics and customs systems present in implementing digital transformation with blockchain? And in particular, the accelerated changes facing the UK in January 2021. So what is tech debt, first of all?
When you look at supply chain and how international trade works, you see that it is still very analog and technology has not been adopted there. I think this is what you can see in tech debt, understand by tech debt. So the pain is big, and the adoption of technology lags far behind. And great pain sometimes means great opportunity. So if the adoption of technology would be much further, maybe the pain wouldn't be big enough to adopt blockchain. Now we have the chain to take a big leap and to really revolutionize trade. So it's of course it is bad not to have systems in place, but also sometimes it creates new opportunities.
Okay.
Maybe an interesting add to that. Besides the manual processing of stuff, many companies also have IT systems, which are legacy systems. And the technological debt in that context could be the old legacy systems where maybe the programmers have died already. I mean, that happens. Now, I mean, these pieces were created in the 70s. We have 2020, so some of the programmers at least are retired already, and they're still being pulled out of their retirement, sat in the office for 2 days to program something that put back on their boat, right? And you can imagine it's quite difficult, and still some companies don't replace or don't like to replace legacy systems because there is a lot of cost involved. And there is one wise man in the IT space once said, "Never change a running system." Now all of these things are kind of blocking adoption, obviously, but there is also good news to that. A story from IBM, for instance, and in supply chain, I think they are quite present. And they used to deliver a lot of AS400 supercomputer or computer systems. No, sorry, it's not super. No, that's my private opinion. Sorry for all IBM is on the call. But actually, it was extremely popular, I should say. And they had a lot of customers. And then they introduced Hyperledger. But now they say IBM Hyperledger, which is actually a project of the Internet Foundation. And they present it as IBM blockchain, and actually they leave the blockchain term in the drawer and say this is just the next generation from AS400. What happens with this is that actually most of the IBM customers are able to upgrade to blockchain, but just by purchasing an upgrade to the next IBM product. Now this eases a little bit the adoption. I should mention other large software providers who also provide upgrade paths for their projects, to be fair. So we see that, and we see also opportunities to link new and old systems together. Many efforts are being done on the so-called middlewares or application programming interfaces, APIs. You might have heard the term. Means that one computer can talk to another computer. And if the legacy system talks Chinese and the new system talks, I don't know, Arabic, the middleware would mean a translation between those two worlds. So this is upcoming and actually working well.
Okay, thank you. And so I think one part of Nathan's question was, so with Brexit, what is going to be the impact? We have 10 minutes left. What is going to be the impact of Brexit on blockchain technology, or the opposite? Can blockchain technology alleviate the pains that are gonna come from that event? Do you have any comments on that? Blockchain Brexit? No.
Okay, I can maybe jump in very quickly because I I was contacted by a number of people in the blockchain space, indeed, regarding Brexit, thinking, okay, can it be a solution to Brexit? The fact is that putting in place a blockchain system takes time. It's not something you can do from one day to another. So I don't think you should look at it as a short-term solution. My advice would be to look at the opportunities it opens in the longer term, but certainly, given that Brexit is around the corner, this is not something that can be used, for example, for customs clearance throughout the UK from one day to another. It will require a little bit of time for that. Now, the UK is very, very active on the blockchain scene. They have a very active British Blockchain Association. They're doing a lot of activities, and they're really looking into the opportunities that the technology can open. So I have no doubt that they will try to make the best use of the technology in the months and years to come, whether it's for Brexit or for something else. A number of banks or companies in the city are actively looking into the potential that this technology opens for their own operations as well.
All right, thank you, Emmanuel. I'd like to ask a question to Blanca. So I know that you kind of have these prediction, these forward-looking predictions. So you think that some macro innovations are going to stick around post COVID-19, Blanca? Can you tell us a bit more about this prediction that you have?
Definitely. Yes, think that there are three main macro innovations we can expect to stick around post-COVID-19. The first one would be supply chains would merge into resilient ecosystems. Digital technologies will create new ways of delivering a service and goods. So this will require global platforms using technologies such as 5G, robotics, IoT, and blockchain, also DLT, to help link multiple buyers with multiple vendors through many supply chains. So the increasing demand for e-commerce logistics and sustainable delivery will also have an impact on the adoption of self-driving cars and delivery drones that will be an essential part of the supply chain ecosystem and will reduce the impact, environmental impact of online delivery. So definitely, first macro innovation is supply chains merging into resilient ecosystem. Second, I would say digital bureaucracies will become mainstream. So as we see a large number of blockchain projects launched by governments in partnership with the public sector, and blockchain regulatory sandboxes, where governments have an oversight over projects and learn from these projects on the way. We'll see also that governments learn more and more from the COVID-19 experience, and this is crucial to shift investment in favor of smart cities to better manage the next crisis. And third, CBDCs and stable coins will enter into e-commerce. Personally, I think stablecoins and central bank digital currencies, CBDCs in short, have the potential to become a real option for e-commerce. As I said before, the increasing need for financial access and digital money instead of cash will accelerate the adoption of digital payments. A less known stablecoin, Terra, is an algorithmic-based stablecoin. It's already used in many e-commerce platforms in Southeast Asia. So which raises the need to integrate also algorithmic stablecoins in regulatory discussions. So as you see, digital currency combines monetary, technological, and also economic factors with politics that should be considered. For example, the yuan counts for 2% of global transactions. Knowing that 47% of online shoppers live in China, a CBDC integrated in e-commerce could revolutionize the sector. China could also take advantage of its Belt and Road influence to extend their digital yuan to Belt and Road countries and increase its influence over the dollar. So network effects could also drive Libra or other stable coins in e-commerce, as is currently done in Southeast Asia with Terra. So as you see, will depend on how efficient, cheap in terms of transaction cost, and user-friendly stablecoins will be to be adopted by consumers.
All right, thank you very much, Blanca.
Emily, can I just jump in and go back to the point that, and Blanca was actually the first one to cite a number of technologies, IoT, AI, etc. And I think it's very important. I know this session is on blockchain, but I think it's very important to look at these technologies as a whole. As a matter of fact,
Exactly.
blockchain works in tandem with other technologies. When we talk about track and trace, it's usually blockchain and IoT, Internet of Things. AI can have a truly transformative impact also on international trade. So it's like a cocktail, you know, when you want to do a good cocktail, you need to use several ingredients. It's the same thing with technology. You use different technologies as well, and you use them for what they are and what they can do, but a combination of technology is much more powerful than just one.
Okay, thank you. We don't have too much time left, so I'm gonna ask a question, and maybe I'd like one of you to answer it in like 2 minutes tops. Okay. So we have a question from Makwemba Malonje, who's asking, can products and services facilitated by blockchain technology earn some status analogous to the fair trade status? I guess you can answer this very, very quickly. Does anyone want to try to answer this in 1 minute or two? Or less?
Basically, it's not the blockchain itself that provides the fair trade status, but it's a means to prove the fair trade status. So you can prove any kind of provenance, any kind of origin, or way of manufacturing or social conditions by blockchain-based certificates. So it's not the blockchain itself, which provides this this quality. But of course, you might say, I don't want to have any goods anymore that do not have a blockchain proof, because if you don't have this kind of seal, you don't believe the existing certificates, and this could very well happen.
Anyone wants to add something before we close the session? All right. Well, a huge thanks to our 4 speakers who answered all the questions, who gave great presentations. Thank you very much for sharing your expertise with us today. A huge thanks as well to the Geneva Macro Labs, and again to the VP and co-founder Renate Günther, who's been working really hard to make this session happen. A huge thanks as well to our participants, to our audience who have actually participated, answered the polls, asked some questions. So thank you very much for this. We hope you could learn things in this session, and that maybe there are some things that you can bring with you to your to your job, to your initiatives, and maybe think about how blockchain technology can help alleviate the impact of COVID-19. So this is the end of this session. Feel free to follow the Geneva Macro Labs. Maybe Renate, if we have 1 minute, you'd like to say just a word on Geneva Macro Labs and how people can keep on following this initiative in 1 minute, Renate?
Sure. Thank you very much. I'm really pleased. Thank you for having made this event a success. Please join us, our community in Geneva, or also online. We are having some webinars coming up. So the Geneva Macro Labs, in a nutshell, we are a do tank, and we try to support sustainable development out of Geneva. And we bring leading minds together so that they can exchange, and that we have really the intellectual potential and have like the right people talking to each other and come to the right conclusions in order to help sustainable development. And you can find more information on our website, which is gemlabs.ch. I posted it in the chat. And I would look forward to welcoming you to further events. And I really thank you for your insights today. And I wish you a very good week. Thank you.
Thank you. So the website is gemlabs.ch, right?
Exactly.
All right. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you, Emily, for your great moderation.
Thank you.
Thank
You're
you.
Thank you, everybody. It was very, very good. Thank you.
welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.